You are trying to understand me as a transgender woman. I know this is a very tall order. It has taken me 65 years to understand myself, and I'm still trying to figure it out. While being transgender seems to dominate who I am right now, it is only the tip of the iceberg. I am or was a structural geologist. I'm an anarchist and social activist, a multi-instrumental musician, an adventurer, a trickster, an ecologist, a performance artist, an author, poet, and novelist, a parent, a shaman, and a Hindu, and so much more. And all of these things are interconnected, so that it is difficult to look at one facet of who I am without the others. For instance, my transition is closely tied to my spirituality and shamanism. Becoming transgender, or two-hearted as the Native Americans say, means that I stand in two worlds and transcend both. It makes me special as a shaman. And it was necessary for a certain shamanic work I am engaged in to help make this a healthier planet. That is not to say I became trans entirely for shamanic reasons. That wouldn't have worked anyway. I had to come to the realization that I was a transgender woman through my most personal and intimate interior journey. I could tell you about all the hints throughout my life, from the earliest feeling memory of my childhood, probably under 2 years old, as I understood I was a girl, though I was identified as a male. I could talk about playing in my mother's closet at ages 3 and 4, trying on her shoes, how I loved to watch her put on makeup. I grew up in the movies of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, particularly the rom-coms. That is where I got my earliest socialization of how to be a woman and interact with women. I always identified with the women in these movies. I was never interested in sports or in cars. I wanted to play with dolls and play at house. At family gatherings, I would prefer to sit and talk with the women as opposed to the men. There were 1,000 other hints from my early childhood. Now, by the time I was 5, I had accepted the male role, knowing it was expected of me. I submerged my true female self, ignoring and denying it even to myself. I still didn't fit in. Either I adopted the role of the fool, or I became a monster. I devoured comedies and monster movies. Adolescence was very awkward for me, as it is for all trans youths. Going through the wrong puberty left me so dysphoric about my body. It is a wonder I didn't die back then. The death rate for trans kids and adolescents is extremely high. If we do not recognize them as trans and help them through this tough time, we are saying we would rather see them die than accept them. Of course, being molested by an older boy at age 12 did not help. I tried to be attracted to girls, and I am to some extent. Girls are beautiful. All girls. All women. But I would not approach them, and when they approached me, I didn't know what to do. I grew my hair long and started taking drugs. I was dropping acid at age 13. I kept the long hair until I was in my 20s, and though I chose to cut it then, after I did, my outer appearance no longer matched my internal picture of myself. I hated looking at myself in mirrors and allowed very few pictures of me to be taken. I really didn't like myself. From behind, many people mistook me for a woman. In high school, a cute girl came up to me and told me people mistook us for each other. She hit on me, but I didn't know how to respond. A lot of kids thought I was gay. I did have a 3-year-long relationship with my best friend, Dee, from the time I was 15 until I was 18. We kept it hidden, or so we thought. We masturbated each other and had oral sex. Once we tried intercourse, but we didn't know what we were doing. I've never really been attracted to anal sex as a bottom. After 3 years, our relationship needed to deepen and grow, or it would die. While I enjoyed our sex play, I didn't enjoy receiving so much as giving. Something was missing for me, but I didn't understand it. Now I know. I wanted Dee to treat me like a woman. The last time we were together, we went out in the woods sitting on a fallen log. Both of us were silent. I wanted him to kiss me, as a man kisses a woman. But I couldn't tell him that. I waited, and it didn't happen. We left that spot and went our separate ways. That was the end. I was 24 when I finally had sex with a woman. While it was nice, it did not fulfill me. I knew I wasn't asexual, and I knew I wasn't gay. I just didn't understand it. Once in a while, I would have anonymous sex with men. I really didn't want them to touch me and would almost become violent if they did. I just wanted to go down on them and be done with it. Afterwards, I would force the incident into my subconscious, remembering it only when I masturbated. In the 1990s, I was running with Detroit anarchists, protesting and trying to build an alternative society. All of them were queer. After I realized that, I began to open up and accept my own sexuality. Through my life until then, I lacked a context and vocabulary to understand what I was. By the late 90s, that context and vocabulary were finally being developed. I probably would have realized I was trans, but a woman from outside my circle set her eyes on me. Of course, I was flattered by her interest. It fooled me into thinking I loved her. She lived out of state, and we emailed and talked on the phone for months before we met. I drove down to her residence and spent the weekend with her. On the way back home, I realized it was not right for me. I tried to break it off, but she became hysterical and threatened to hurt herself. I couldn't bear that. I had a lot of family pressure to have a normal relationship, so I acquiesced. I really did try to love her, and in a way, I did love her. But it wasn't right, and sex was a disaster. I continued trying to understand who I was. I tried to discuss it with her, but she used it to shame me. After being married for over a decade, we broke up in 2010. I followed my daughter back up to Michigan. I had been her custodial parent from the age of 10 until she was an adult. And that's when I got in trouble with the law. My wife and I sort of reconciled, though we never had sex again. In 2013, my father was diagnosed with cancer. I nursed him through his cancer and buried him in the beginning of May 2014. On June 1st, a month later, I started serving my prison term. My wife did encourage me to find spiritual help in the form of a shaman, which was a path I had been drawn to all of my life. From 2011 until I went to prison, I took part in very powerful shamanic journeys, first as a patient, then an ally. This opened my heart and helped me anchor myself better in my spiritual being. And then I went to prison. I made my prison time into a spiritual sabbatical. I joined the pagans. And then I became the top Hindu on the compound. I also took advantage of the availability of other religious services to check them all out. I attended Buddhist meditation. I sat in on Jewish services and attended a couple of Rastafarian meetings. I sat in on Catholic services quite regularly and enjoyed the ceremony, which was so pagan in nature. But nothing drew me in like the Hindu faith, which I had practiced off and on since the 1970s. I practiced shamanic healing with the pagans and was very good at it. To them I was an elder, although I was also a trickster. I became the faith group representative of the Hindus. I devoured all the principal Hindu scriptures in the chapel library, along with books my family sent me. Hindu mysticism has many well-developed paths to enlightenment. That was my purpose in prison. I intended to be enlightened by the time I left. I spent long hours in meditation and introspection, stripping away layers of false identity. My heart became more and more open, and I did become enlightened to a degree. In the end, I realized there is no threshold you cross in enlightenment, no honorary degree bestowed upon you. Enlightenment is a continuous process that never ends. After 4 years at Loretto in Pennsylvania, I requested transfer to another prison where they had a faith-based prison program called Life Connections. It was only offered at 2 prisons, one in Virginia and one at Milan, Michigan. I came back to Michigan. Life Connections was like all prison programs, a bunch of hoops you had to jump through and then you got your certificate. Really, you got out of it what you put into it. My spiritual teacher and advisor was a very elderly black woman. She was extremely Christian, but she soon developed a special attachment to me, as she recognized I had an intimate connection to God through my own faith. But at the end of the program, other circumstances landed me in deep trouble and drew my faith into question. Throughout the years in prison, I met several trans women. They seemed to be drawn to me as someone who accepted them for who they were, someone they could talk to without being shunned or hit upon. Now I suspect they could sense our kinship. Trans women in prison were reviled as the lowest, even while the most vocally transphobic would visit them in secret. During my final months in Milan, an Indian Hindu was moved into my cell. He was a doctor who engaged in Medicare fraud. Really, he was a self-centered asshole with a lot of money. He humped me up on a cell phone charge for which he wouldn't accept responsibility. I lost some of my Hindu faith, not in the teachings, but in other followers. Then he hired a hitman to take me out so he could blame me for the cell phone. I was attacked with a lock on a sock the morning I was supposed to leave for halfway. I fought off the assailant and went into protective custody. After they interviewed me, SIS had to place me in a cell in the SHU with another inmate. They asked me if I had a problem with transgender women. I said no. The next morning, they married me up, as it was called, with Sabrina. The night before I was placed in her cell, my higher self told me that I had to stay open to what was to come. It would be very important to the process of finding myself. The second day together, Sabrina looked at me and said, "I think you're really a woman." By the time I left a month later, I knew that to be true. So that's most of my story. There is more. It took me another year and a half outside of prison to accept that I am trans and to step out as my authentic self. It is the best thing that ever happened to me. If only I could have discovered this before I hit adolescence. But I know it now, and with that knowledge, all of the puzzle pieces of my entire life have fallen into place. A lifetime of dysphoria that kept me from realizing my potential has melted away. That's enough. I hope this helps you to understand better who I am. Love you, Gary.